I was hoping to release this devlog alongside the mods themselves, but they still need a fair bit of work. The thing is, I want this next thing that I'll be releasing to feel like a proper update to the game, plus a gift to the community in the form of a tool that makes making new content much simpler. And adding new features and polishing the existing ones, fixing bugs and all that takes time. And I can feel myself getting fatigued, so switching to another project for a time is a good idea. Which is something that I was supposed to do a week and a half ago, but what's a schedule anyway? Let's just get through the things I did manage to implement since the last devlog. Early on I completely neglected making notes, so the most I can say about the progress is that I was primarily fixing bugs, both new ones and ones from the extras mod, such as the Gambler's special move having a bugged interaction with the damaging move skill, creating ghost enemies, which were already dead but still occupied cells on the field. Then I added the merchant to the Gambler shop, in the form of the original Gambler concept me and Apocalypse made, though with an added cape to match all the other merchants, plus an idle animation of flipping a coin. The animation could definitely use some more work, but it's good enough for now. Also, for some reason the facing direction of the merchant was inconsistent during the initial testing, but that ended up being fairly easy to fix. And after that came actually implementing new content, starting with adding more skills to the Gambler shop, so it has a comparable number of them to other shops. These skills ended up being Combo Bet, which rewards you 40 coins for getting a quad combo, that is killing 4 enemies in a single turn, One-Way Bet, which rewards 20 coins for clearing a region without turning around, Frugal Bet, which rewards 20 coins for clearing a region without using consumables, Might Bet, which rewards 40 coins for dealing 20 damage in a single attack, and Stacked Deck, not a bet this time. This one makes it so that whenever you play a card consumable, its effect is reapplied after 2 turns. Originally I had it at 3 turns, but decided that it's too powerful, since it effectively allowed freezing or poisoning enemies for 6 turns total, and now that I think about it, I might change it again, so that it is reapplied after 1 turn, but can be leveled up to a maximum of level 3, at which point it will reapply after 3 turns. Though before actually implementing the bet skills, I had to make sure that the obliteration bet worked correctly so I could use it as a basis. It didn't. For starters, it gave you the reward immediately after leaving the store, because the store is also a location and you took no hits in it. But also it re-triggered itself if you quit, reloaded and obliterated another region, so I ended up having to expand Content Loader with another functionality. A storage that is persistent between game sessions, that can be either permanent or resetting on each run. And before that, I've run into a bug where Drunken Fist attack completely broke the game with a really hard to trace error, so I once again took a while to bash my head against the wall to try and figure it out. And that particular wall was very sturdy, especially since there was a second issue, where sometimes after finishing the Drunken Fist attack, your turn would just end, even though you still had other tiles waiting to be executed. And the worst part about it? That bug wasn't throwing any errors, making it even harder to track down. I eventually fixed it, though I also forgot about taking notes again, so the only detail I can offer is that the solution was to rework how Drunken Fist causes the user to move. I also fixed several other bugs in that time, and modified Drunken Fist so that the movement it causes can make you collide with an enemy if there is one in the way. And I implemented that storage solution, using it to hopefully fix the obliteration bet. Specifically, after clearing each non-shop map location, I store whether or not the player took any hits in that region, and then, when they enter a shop, I get that data again, or in case of the Moonlit Port shop, I get the data from the current region, and if it is hitless, I get the skills level and the number of rewards the player already received this run, giving the reward money multiplied by the difference between the skills level and rewards received, then save the new amount of rewards received. And I decided to make it so all bets would give out the rewards when you reach the shop, because it just makes sense. You are making the bet with the merchants, they pay you out next time you see them. And it was a way to work around the Moonlit Port shop being a part of the Moonlit Port, meaning that in its default behavior, the obliteration bet wouldn't give you its reward until after you left the shop. Then came the time to see if the bet finally worked as intended, At that time I had a run post halfway through the Moonlit port, so I continued it, got to the shop, and spent a while rerolling through debug functions to actually get the bed to appear. It took so long that I eventually decided to record it for this devlog so I could make a joke that this is the real gambling in this mod pack, and then I proceeded to get the bed on the first reroll after starting recording. Because of course I did. And no, it still didn't work as intended, and I spent I think 2 days pretty much just bugfixing the bed and other issues I've run into during testing. Then testing paused for a moment when I decided on a whim to make a unique sprite for Shockwave Chance Strike, because I got it during one of my test runs, and it struck me that it would probably look good with a lightning bolt in place of the wound. And can you guess what ended up happening by the time I dealt with these errors? That's right, I forgot about taking notes again. I also started actually implementing these new skills, and paused before finishing that in order to work on streamlining the content loader. You see, up to that point, I had it set up as the bare minimum necessary to get my mods to work, and less loader functionality meant requiring more work when setting up the content itself. To compare, previously to implement a new tile, you had to set up the tile's unique class that describes how it works, set up a data pair of tile's technical name and ID, a data pair of tile's ID and class, a data pair of tile's unlock ID and regular ID, a name of the tile's unlock item for the camp, the localization data for the tile's name and description, have the sprites prepared for all compatible enchantments, and create a shop unlock. Now, all the necessary data got condensed into a single class, except for localization since that is used by pretty much everything, so it can stay as is, and the shop unlock generates itself automatically, or rather, it has an option to generate itself automatically, still opening up the possibility of loading in a pre-made one for more advanced developers who might want to do something fancy. And I went to implement the same level of streamlining to other features that Content Loader implements, so skills, heroes, enemies. Then I got somewhat stuck on adjusting the loading of new shops. Specifically, figuring out how to add all the skills that should appear to the shop was somewhat tricky. If it was just the skills for that shop that the mod it comes from adds, things would be simple. But I wanted to make it possible to have things like a different mod, adding new skills to the Gambler shop. And more importantly, all the shops are supposed to have the brown or merchant skills in them, those being Big Pockets and Rogue Retail. So a new shop should implement these skills, both vanilla ones and, again, ones added by another mod. Eventually, I decided to take the list of skills from the Moonlit Port shop, since that is already set up to have all the skills in the game, in a format that the shops require. Then I struggled to figure out how to access the Moonlit Port shop when it's not loaded into the game. Then I realized that I'm an idiot, and in the very function that I was modifying, I was already accessing a shop that isn't loaded into the game. And of course, after changing so much, the mods couldn't even load in properly before they started throwing errors. Then after fixing that, I got sent to the Shadow Realm again. And after fixing one problem, still the Shadow Realm. I did get it to work eventually, of course, and though by then I thought of even more improvements to the content loader, I decided to go back to the Gambler pack itself and implement a small feature inspired by Silksong. Not any specific game mechanic, enemy, item or area, although making a Hollow Knight mod for Shogun Showdown sounds really appealing if I'm being honest, but by the insane attention to detail. That game is filled with things that the developers didn't have to do, but they did because of how much they cared about their project. For instance, when you collect clothes from enemies in a one-time quest, their corpse sprites change to reflect that. When another quest sees you collect pelts from bird-like enemies, they slowly float to the ground, while every other item just drops straight down. In the ant area, you have tiny ants walking on the ground, and these things, instead of being just the background element, actually carry off the bodies of enemies you defeat. Such details are insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but they are fun to come up with and fun to discover. So just in case you would prefer to discover it for yourself, I'll talk about it in the later part of the devlog, alongside the thing I got to implementing afterwards, which is also a bit of a secret. But while implementing these secret things, I decided to take a break and add something else I wanted to mod in, that being enchantments. Now, it would be easy enough to add some of them with a fixed list of compatible tiles and call it a day, but I was more ambitious than that, and devised a system that would allow for the enchantments to be compatible across mods, without the need to make them explicitly work with one another. That system being a tag-based categorization of tiles. An idea that came from looking at which tiles are incompatible with which enchantments in the base game. For instance, poison can be put on any tile that deals damage, but double strike is not compatible with chakram or thorns. And why is that? Because these two tiles could be described as self-blocking. Chakram's damage is reset to 0 after use, and thorns take up a cell when spawned, and cannot be spawned on an occupied cell. Thorns also cannot have the perfect strike enchantment, and neither can trap. Why? Because the damage they deal is delayed. So, if I wanted to implement an enchantment that makes the attack pierce through the initial target and potentially hit another one, I don't need to decide compatibility for each individual tile, but rather decide the tags which would be used to check for that compatibility. Looking at melee tiles, they all either hit just a single tile, or already pierce to hit all the spaces they attack at the same time. And we can of course discard the non-damaging tiles, though I might revisit them at a later point to see if it would be worth giving them some limited enchantment capability. After all, if a special move Swap Toss can curse or poison the targets, there's no reason why the tile Swap Toss couldn't be enchantment with curse or poison, except for the fact that it simply wasn't programmed to count enemies it affects as targets for the enchantment. And out of the tiles that remain, there are two categories that jump out at me as actually making sense for a piercing enchantment. Ones that fire out a projectile, and the ones that use a tethered weapon. So I could set this enchantment to be compatible with tiles that have damage greater than -1, since that's how the game distinguishes tiles that cannot deal damage from ones like Chakram, which start at 0 damage, and that are tagged with either projectile or tethered. And I might actually implement that piercing enchantment into extras, because it sounds like it would be fun to use, especially with Blazing Suisei and Key Push. But that's besides the point. And the point is that this tag system serving as an interface between tiles and enchantments allows for basically perfect compatibility if both sides use it. You don't need to think about what modded enchantments the tile you're adding should be compatible with, just describe its functionality using the existing tags. And you don't need to think about which modded tiles should be compatible with your new enchantment, just mark which tags describe tiles that might be compatible, and which tags describe the tiles that definitely aren't. And although the system is designed for the sake of enchantments, it doesn't mean it's the only thing it can be used for. I purposefully made it broader than that, for example adding tags that describe the damage type of the attack, all to open the door for different uses of that system, as well as enchantments I didn't think of. For instance, you could use it to implement the counter damage from Dark Souls, with stab weapons dealing extra damage against enemies who are about to attack. Or create a skill that grants immunity to fire damage specifically, so you don't have to worry about blowing yourself up with Blazing Suisei or the bomb. Or if you're crazy, you could implement an alchemy system based on these tile tags, and I might be crazy enough to do that. I've had that idea for quite a while. Because if there's one thing I can't get enough of, it's ghost spaceships. But the second thing is alchemy, both historical and fantasy. Although if you are observant and know how enchantments in Shogun Showdown work, you might spot something missing from this tag system, that being the sprites. Each combination of tile and enchantment has its own unique sprite. Sometimes it's just a palette swap, sometimes it's more elaborate. So if we have two mods that weren't made with each other in mind, and the only data they share with each other are the tags, how can we have a sprite for this specific tile enchantment combination? Simple answer is, we can't. So what's the next best thing? Making a sprite on the spot. It's not going to be as good as a custom-made one, but it will be better than no compatibility. And I will of course keep the option of loading in a custom sprite for a given combination. It just won't be required, as each enchantment is going to provide a shader that defines how to edit the default sprite to represent that enchantment. And since I know firsthand how shaders can seem like black magic, I will include two default shaders that mods can use instead of providing their own, those being a palette swap and an image overlay. And the first enchantment I intend to implement is Chaos, which each time you use the enchanted tile, causes it to transform into a different tile with the Chaos enchantment. Others that I considered were Confusion, which would inflict the same effect on the enemy's hit as the Lucky Die consumable, and Drunken, which would replicate the Drunken Fist's special effect. So why did I decide to implement arguably the least useful one? Well, first of all, I literally just thought of a way to make it potentially more useful, that is, by making it reroll itself each turn it's not in the attack queue. And that aside, the main issue with the Drunken enchantment is that I have no idea how I would actually modify the sprites to have them look reasonable and still be able to represent whether the attack will be made forward, backwards or in both directions. And Confusion I don't think would actually work well as an enchantment. The reason why it works in a consumable is that a consumable doesn't use up your turn. So you see what the enemy intentions got changed to. Meanwhile, if it was an attack, the enemy would immediately act upon the new intent without giving you a chance to react. And I know this for a fact, because this Lucky Die effect was originally going to be Gambler's special move, and I changed it because it simply didn't feel fun to use. Chaos, on the other hand, even if not very good, sounds fun to play with. And more importantly, Chaos will actually be two enchantments, a regular one and a background one, the same type as free play. This way, it can randomize into any tile in the game, with any enchantment paired with it. And it gives me a reason to figure out how to implement both of these types of enchantments. Plus, despite how complex it may sound, it should actually be quite easy to implement, since the vanilla game already has an effect that rerolls a tile into a different one, so I can make use of that. But all of that aside, I can certainly see why you would consider this enchantment to be plainly bad, and thus its addition as a point against this mod. If you had such a thought about this, or any other feature of my mods, then I have good news for you. I am taking care to make every element of my mods optional, because ultimately I want my mods to enhance the intended experience of the base game, not intrude upon it. A new hero is an optional feature by default, since you can simply not play as them. And my archive bans mod allows you to select which skills and tiles appear during the runs. And by the time I finally release Content Loader and Gambler package, archive bans will be expanded with a functionality to ban shops and battle rewards from appearing, so you can disable the Gambler's shop or the Chaos enchantment entirely if you so wish. Or play without the Dancer shop if you're so inclined. I don't know why you would do that, but it will be an option. There was, as I mentioned previously, more that I implemented, but it's things that will be a secret to discover in the mod. So if you want a chance to discover it for yourself once the mod comes out, this is a time to click off the video. Thanks for watching up to this point. Let me know what you think about this mod, subscribe if you want to see more, and until next time, farewell. And for those who are still here, let's start with the small detail I mentioned earlier in the devlog regarding the bets. The default behavior of them is that you can only get the money from winning in the shops. Because, much like with selling consumables, this is when you interact with the merchants. And it was that comparison to consumables that made me implement an additional check into them. If you have the Rogue Retail skill, you get the reward money immediately after winning the bet. It of course doesn't affect the Frugal, Obliteration and one-way bets at all, since they trigger at the end of the region anyway, and the only benefit of getting money mid-region is for rerolling anyway, so it is a largely pointless detail, even for the two skills that it does affect. But it's a largely pointless detail that just makes sense to have. A second, much bigger thing I was working on is the merchant as a playable hero. After all, that's what he was supposed to be, the original gambler. He may have been replaced in that particular role, but it was still a solid character concept, so I didn't want to discard him. So of course he would still run the gambler shop, and from the very beginning of the shop's idea, I had a thought that he could be there in the shop most of the time, except of course when you play as him, in which case he would be replaced by the Moonlit Port merchant. And that idea too was one I didn't want to discard, so it evolved into a tag-in skill. Upon buying it, you swap characters and continue on as merchant, while the other hero remains in the shop. The original idea was that you would of course keep your tiles, but since you're now playing as a different character, all of your skills are rerolled and you receive a full heal. And of course, this idea is why his sprite is separate from the shop. So it can be replaced with the Moonlit Port Merchant, if you start the game as the merchant and come to the gambler shop, or with another hero, if you started the game as that hero, and use tagin to swap to merchant. I noted down that idea when I came up with it, then left it be while I was working on other things. By the time I returned to it, the concept had evolved. I decided that he should still be an unlockable hero, but a secret one that would take some effort to get. First, tagin wouldn't be unlockable in camp. Instead, you would get it for clearing the quest to buy out the entire gambling shop. Once unlocked, you would have to buy it in the shop for a price far higher than any other skill, and then win the game as the merchant to unlock him as selectable from camp. Regarding his actual implementation, his special move is Mirror, behaving as if the enemy you walked into used the mirror tile, so it is a fairly unique behavior. It's not necessarily the perfect fit, but I was struggling with figuring out a unique special move for the merchant, and this was an idea I already wrote down a while back as a potential special move. For his starting deck, I wanted to keep the trend of the starting decks not sharing any tiles between themselves, which combined with the fact that I didn't really want to add more tiles made it rather tricky. Especially considering Merchant's diminutive stature that Apocalypse gave him. It definitely wouldn't make sense to give him the Tetsubo, for instance. So the first pair I created was Tanegashima plus Backstrike, which is a fairly strong synergy, so I decided to make that the secondary deck. For the primary, I eventually went with Blazing Suicide plus Trap. I thought it's a pretty funny combination, making it seem like he went to fight without an actual weapon, just grabbing whatever was lying around the store. Apocalypse suggested Sharp Turn plus Back Smoke Bomb instead. I tested both options and ultimately came to a conclusion that the best was somewhere in the middle. So his main deck is now Blazing Suicide plus Back Smoke Bomb. As for his characterization, at least what little of it heroes get through the single line on day 7, and bosses' unique reactions to them, I went for a mercenary angle. After all, a part of unlocking this hero involves paying him quite a lot for him to join the fight, and the bosses mostly recognize him as one of the merchants and respond to that fact. I won't show the exact bugs here, as I want to leave something for you to discover, but I can tell you that the 4 bosses that can react to him are Daisuke, the twins, the statue, and Nobunaga. Another small detail that came to mind and resulted in me implementing a whole new system into the content loader was the shop dialogue. Because if the game decides that you should get a free consumable upon entering the shop, that will be accompanied by a line from the merchant. And that's all well and good. I knew about that mechanic already and wrote in a line for the gambler shop, but then I thought, what if this happens during the time when a hero is replacing the merchant? Specifically, what if it's Shadow who's at the store? They don't speak at all, so it wouldn't feel right leaving things like this. So I implemented a dynamic string system. That is, instead of a simple text for the game to display in a given place, you can have a function that decides what text should be shown. And I used that to make it so the consumable given dialogue changes depending on whether it's set by the merchant, the Moonlit Port Merchant, the Shadow, or any other hero. Then I had to implement the tagging skill itself, starting with skill rerolling. Though I didn't want to simply replace every skill with a different random one, instead I decided to make it so the skills are grouped by type, and then the list of all types gets shuffled and randomly assigned to each group, so that all skills from it are rerolled into the skills of that type. And the first test seemed to work mostly as intended. I rerolled a second level triple or nothing and a stacked deck into 3 different bets, and 2 warring skills I don't remember, into 2 combo skills I don't remember. Afterwards I made a small change, so that skills would never reroll into the same type. The second half of the skill to implement was the hero swap. The idea there was to get the hero that was spawned in as a part of the gambler shop, swap his position and rotation with the player's hero, change which of them the global hero reference is pointing to, and see what breaks when I do that. And the first thing that broke was actually related to skill rerolling, as the game decided to replace every single one of the 4 gambling skills I had with Cyrus Scale, because I didn't check if the player can obtain the given skill. Though fixing that oversight wouldn't be enough, the Feather and the Scale are the only 2 items in the type that I call Artifact, ones that can only appear in Moonlit port, and both of them have a max level of 1. So if your 3 or more skills of one type are rerolled into this artifact type, the game will simply run out of skills to give. Now this is an issue that could be fixed by simply safeguarding against that specific scenario, picking a different skill category to replace the problematic one. But frankly, that's boring. Isn't it a more fun idea to instead introduce a new artifact skill that can be leveled up, preventing this situation from occurring altogether, having another secret unlock for the player to discover? And what I came up with for that was Broken Coin, a skill which increases all damage dealt to enemies by 1 per level, and I mean all damage. Everything that the game considers to be an instance of damage, as compared to all other skills which typically increase the tile damage, or in some cases something like enemy to enemy or collision damage specifically. However, each time you play a tile, you lose 1 coin, and if you ever run out of money or take damage, the broken coin is destroyed. Once hero swapping and skill rerolling seemed to roughly work, I wanted to test the detail I mentioned earlier, that if you return to a gambling shop as the merchant after getting tagged in, the hero you started the run as will be there in place of the shopkeeper. But before I could do that, I ran into a strange issue where the merchant's special move wouldn't work. That being said, there was a different error that I fixed earlier in the run, and I couldn't replicate the issue after starting a new one, so I'm hoping it's nothing. This, however, is definitely not nothing, because not only there are 2 merchants, but Tagin also appeared in the store. Tagin, which is supposed to have a maximum level of 1, and thus should not appear when the player already has it, and which is explicitly said to be incompatible with the merchant hero. And the only thing that comes to mind as a cause is that having an incompatible skill messes up the script that's supposed to check if a skill can appear or not. But I also couldn't get it to appear again when spamming rerolls in the shop, so once again, I am leaving it be and hoping it's nothing. The 2 merchants issue, on the other hand, was just a simple oversight, where I updated which variable should be used to check what hero was selected at the start of a run, but forgot to do so in one spot. And that's all I've got for this update. Again, thanks for watching up to this point. Let me know your thoughts about these projects either here in the comments or in the Discord server I made for them. Subscribe if you want to see more of these devlogs, and until next time, farewell.